All right, we're going to do quite a bit of reading tonight. As you can see from the text, all those boldly emphasized texts out of Genesis are going to need to be read. So let's start in Genesis chapter 12. And what this is, I was going through trying to pick out some high points. There's just so many rich things in the life of Abraham, and I see so many of these as a basis for the reality of long-term faith, long-term for you and me as individuals, but also long-term as far as how God wants us to believe throughout the ages, from the days of Abraham on. And so when I see these, I'm thinking, this is the book of Genesis. What does Genesis mean? Beginnings. And we're looking at the beginnings of God teaching us how to have faith. And this man, Abraham, is an example of a living, active, working relationship with God. So let's do some reading. Who will read for us the first 7 verses of Genesis 12? Anybody ready? All right. PJ, go take right off.
Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old, and he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land as far as the side of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Thank you, PJ. Just a brief statement for these 7 verses. There could have been a lot more, but here it is. Abraham was blank years old, 75 years old, and blank when God called him and promised to make of him a great nation. What's that? Childless. I like the way you think, Ron. He was childless, 75 years old and childless when God called him, said he was going to make of him a great nation. There are some other promises here. What are some of the other promises God makes to him? Going to give you land. Going to bless those who bless you. Curse those who curse you. God is, these are his promises to Abraham. He'll more more formally bring a covenant with him later, but these are the promises as we get started out. Genesis chapter 15, 1 through 6. Who will read that? All right, see a hand in the back. Looks like Shannon.
After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness.
Thank you, Shannon. God's promise of a child born to Abraham is renewed, assuring him that his descendants will be like the blank in the blank. Stars in the heavens. That's pretty elementary. What did Abraham ask about Eliezer? Doesn't give us much information about this young man, but he was apparently a servant's son or someone born in his house who, by tradition, by law, by some norm, would have been the heir. And Abram is saying, hey, this is the guy, and God says, no, he's not the guy. I'm going to give you the guy. I'm going to give you a son. And then it says, this is the last part of this section in the worksheet. Abraham blanked God. He believed God, and his faith was counted by God as righteousness. This is huge. Don't just read this and kind of pass it over, because this will be the basis for salvation from here until the Lord returns. Salvation through faith in God. What does James say about it? James chapter 2. Who was saved along with Abraham on the basis of their faith? You remember who James mentions there? Rahab the harlot. As Abraham is saved by faith, Rahab the harlot is saved by faith. We will meet her in eternity. She's in the family of Jesus, by the way. Do a little research on Rahab. Not right now. Later on. All right, Genesis 15, 12 to 16. Who will read that? Be ready. Who wants to read? All right, Rhonda.
The sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, where the son of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
Very good. Thank you, Ron. Abraham is given a view of the blank future, seeing that his descendants will be enslaved and oppressed for how many years? 400. This is where we have one of the readings of 400 years bondage. It's a round number, round figure. But they will come out of their bondage with great blank possessions or wealth. Remember when they left, the Egyptians were pulling off their earrings and giving them to them. And so when they left, they had a lot of wealth, a lot of possessions. And inherit the very land where Abraham was standing. He was standing there talking to God, and God says, you're going to have descendants like the stars of the sky, but they're going to be enslaved for 400 years, but then I'm going to bring them right back to where you're standing. They're going to inherit this land. That's why God told him to get up and leave Ur. I'm going to take him to a land that he would show him, and then show him that his future descendants would be given that land. This was not to happen until the blank of the Amorites, the iniquity of the Amorites, was complete, showing that God does not blank reward or punish nations. What would you put in that blank? The word I'm thinking of is arbitrarily. He does not arbitrarily. Spell that how you want. If you don't spell it right, a little red line will appear underneath it, kind of squiggly. And that'll let you know you need to correct it. You could put the word randomly. God does not willy-nilly. I don't know if I'd write willy-nilly. You could probably spell that pretty easy. He doesn't punish or reward nations just as he wants to. I'm putting that in there because there are a great many accusations about God to this effect. Oh, the God of the Old Testament, he'd get up in a bad mood and he'd wipe out a nation. No, he didn't. Never. Anytime God acted against a nation, it was for good cause. And he's telling Abraham way ahead of time, the Amorites have some iniquity, but it's not complete yet. But when it is complete, I'm bringing your kids in here and giving them the land that the Amorites are in. All right, Genesis chapter 16, verses 3 to 16. Who would like to read this section? All right, I got it. Hand in the back, Titus. Let you read this one, and then we'll split it up later.
And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee, I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence come thou? And whither wilt thou go? And she said, Man, you have to excuse me real quick.
We're used to it.
It changed on me. I forgot to switch it back after yesterday's study. All right. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, Return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinmen. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, You are a God of seeing, for she said, Truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram.
All right. Thank you, Titus. I'm convinced that if we could read Hebrew, there'd be a lot of things we wouldn't need to explain, but we can't read Hebrew, at least I can't. So in English, we have to translate the translation and see what's here, and there's some really good stuff here. Sarah offered Abraham her blank, Hagar, handmaid. What that relationship was, I'm not exactly sure, but she wasn't at that point his wife. She was a handmaid. That's how she's described. And she did that so that she may have a child by her. That's how Sarah words it in the text. When Hagar conceived, she came to blank Sarah, despise Sarah, who treated her harshly because of it. Hagar fled, but was found by an angel of the Lord and told to return and submit to Sarah. Her child was to be named Ishmael, and then there are two blanks that you would fill in with the definition of the word Ishmael, which would be God hears, because God had heeded her affliction. Abraham was blank years old when Ishmael was born to him. He's 86, but is he the promised son? He is not the promised son. This is another text that we could just easily pass over like a nice little story in the Bible. But what's going on here? Tried to cheat. God had a plan. He gave him the plan. He told him the plan. How long have they been waiting? He's 86. How old was he when God made the promise? He was 75, so you do the math. It's been a while. No son. Was Sarah past bearing age when Abraham was 75? Yeah. And we'll find out if you haven't read ahead. That's allowed, by the way. You can read ahead. Sarah's 10 years younger than Abraham. So she's past childbearing age, and time is marching on, and this child has not arrived, and so she comes up with a plan. Now, here's something, this is not in the text, but I'm just thinking in terms of being a man who's been talking to God. What should Abraham have done when Sarah made the suggestion? Should have said no. On what basis? God's already promised us a son. This is not his plan. This is something we've come up with, not God. Appreciate you thinking about it. Appreciate you trying to work things out. but this is not God's plan. This is not what he's revealed. Did God stop them? Obviously, he did not. What does God do for Hagar? First, gives her a child. She has a child. Tells her that her son is going to be the progenitor of a great nation. Not the promised nation, not the promised child. But why is he named Ishmael? God is the God who hears. What did we do just a few minutes ago when we heard about Dakota and when we heard about the little foster baby? We did what Hagar probably did. It doesn't say that she prayed, but when the text says that God hears, it's implied that there was some request she was making to God in her heart or with her mouth. However, God hears. He sees. He knows what's going on, and he is open to our circumstances. This is Hagar, who's born a child that was not planned, but nevertheless is there, and God says, I hear you, I see you, I'm going to take care of you. And then what does God have the angel tell her? You go back and you submit to Sarah's authority. Isn't that interesting? Sarah has authority. What authority does she have? She's the mistress of the house. She has authority over Hagar, and God says, you go back and you submit to that. God heeded her affliction, and Abraham was 86. So I'm putting these numbers in here because God puts them in there, and it gives us some basis for thought about waiting on God's promise to be fulfilled. All right, Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 through 5. Don, you got a question, or do you want to read? Or an observation?
Okay. This is an observation, and I'm not trying to go anywhere with this, but, we said Abraham should have said no, and I believe he should have said no ultimately, but I just wanted to question why he thought maybe it was okay. And that might have been, did I miss it in Genesis that he did promise Sarah that she was going to be the part of the descendant thing? Or did he only promise it to Abraham so far in the written down? Did he ever say you and Sarah, or did he just say you, Abraham, are going to be,
The focus will come to Sarah, but I don't think it has at that point. Because that's chapter 15, and there's really nothing that I know of that would specifically pull Sarah in by name.
one woman, but we know that during the Old Covenant, man, there were David and everybody else had concubines, had extra wives and all that stuff. And so, sometimes it's like God might have just, I don't know. I believe that it was for him and Sarah, obviously, because that's the covenant.
Right.
He tells us that, but I'm just kind of wondering, was it skewed to him? Well, maybe this is the way he wants to do it. I don't know. I don't know.
And I'm not in any way trying to vilify Abraham. My goodness, he was a friend of God. But on the other hand, we're talking about, or I asked the question, what should he have said to Sarah? What else could Abraham have done at that juncture? He could have asked God, Lord, how about this plan? How about this plan? And there's no record that he did that. Now, it doesn't say specifically that he asked and didn't get an answer, but I think if that was the situation, God would have said, that's not the plan. However, this worked out. God says, all right, I'm going to keep my promise to Abraham, and I'm going to take care of Hagar and Ishmael as well. I am hearing. I see what's going on. God is not the God who's off in the distant heavens, unaware of what's happening with you and me. He knows every victory we enjoy, and he's right there with us. He knows every tragedy we face, every crisis we endure. He knows everything we're afraid of. He's there with us all the time. Billy?
Scripture is going to talk about when Sarah laughed at the fact that she's going to have a child. You know, God told Abraham, you're going to be a great nation. Tell Sarah, Sarah overhears it, she laughs, and the angel said, why did Sarah laugh? And she denied the fact. That tells me that she knew that God's intention was her and Abraham, not Abraham and Hagar, was to have a child.
But that's coming. We haven't read that yet. We haven't got there yet. This is chapter 15, or 16 rather. So Don's got a good question. Shannon?
Ishmael, the father or the forerunner of the Muslim faith?
He's not the forerunner of the Muslim faith, and there is some controversy whether or not he is the forerunner of the Arab nations. I have read that he is, and I've seen other scholars who deny that. But God said, I'm going to make of him a great nation. And when you read the prophecy, the prophetic word that's given about him specifically, what does it say here? Verse 11 of chapter 16. You call his name Ishmael because the Lord's given heed to your affliction. He'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will live to the east of all his brothers. That's what we know about the future of Ishmael, right there from God. The rest of it would have to be searched out by somebody who was looking for it. So I've seen both claims made about the Arabs. Muhammad, however, he didn't become a factor until it was around 600 A.D. Jesus had already come, and the gospel had spread. And about 600 years after that, Muhammad establishes Islam and does so by the sword, and it spreads all over the Mediterranean world, the Arab world. And that's where that comes in. It's very, very interesting history, though. And I'm hoping you're seeing, as I see, that with regard to relationships with God, nothing has really changed. Yes, he talked to Abraham, he spoke to him, but the same thing applied to him that applies to us. It's by faith. God gives you a plan, you stick with it. Don't deviate from that. Don't come up with your own plan. Stick with his plan, and things will work out. But even if you do deviate, he's not going to forsake you. Come on back in. Let's get back to the old plan, and we'll make do with what's come of the rest of it. All right. Oh, Titus.
I just the angel told Hagar to go back to Sarah, right? And I've just been studying Philemon and Colossians, and we talked about this a little bit this morning. It's interesting how God's Spirit doesn't change in a Christian household, if you will. You know, like
right.
That Hagar was told to go back to her household to submit to this family that was under God and believed in Him and had faith in Him, and then that Spirit doesn't change, because then Paul over in Philemon will send, Onesimus or whatever his name is, back to Philemon, right? And, slave back to the master in the sense. And it's interesting to see that continuity. I just wanted to point that out. God not changing. His Spirit doesn't change from Genesis all the way to the end of our book.
Good observation to make, I think. And it brings up an interesting feature of our humanity. God has given us this great gift called imagination. Your imagination is a source of a lot of wonderful pleasure in your life, but it sometimes works against us. For example, if you're Hagar and you're hearing God say, you go back and submit to Sarah, Hagar might, like I tend to do, imagine the absolute worst if she goes back to Sarai and talk herself out of doing what God says. Oh, if I go back to Sarah, this is what's going to happen. I just know. How many times do we tell ourselves that and we don't know anything? But we say that because we want our fear to be validated. And I look down through history and I see people being told to do all kinds of things that did not make sense, quote unquote, from a human standpoint. And yet, if you follow through, it's going to be a lot easier for you if you don't, because when God tells you to do something and you set about by faith to do what he says, he's going to bless you in the doing of it. Doesn't mean everything's going to be super easy, but I mean, consider Jonah. What if Jonah had prayed when God told him and said, Lord, I don't want to go to those Ninevites. I really don't like them at all. But based on you telling me what I'm going to go. He wouldn't have had to spend 3 days inside a fish. But that's not what he did. When he got spat up by the fish after repenting, what did God tell him to do? Very same thing he had originally told him. You're still going to Nineveh. So, yeah, when God tells you to do something, follow through with faith. He hears, he listens, he knows where we are, and he is not immune to our cries. Anything else? Very good. Genesis chapter, did we finish this one? Yeah, we did. Genesis 17, 1 through 5. Who's got that? Who was next to read? Oh, PJ?
17, 9 through 25?
Chapter 17, 1 through 5.
1 through 5. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just did that one, didn't we? Did we finish? We never did any of that, did we? Good night. You guys got to keep me lined up here. So let's fill in some blanks. Genesis 17, 1 through 5. God renames Abram. Exalted Father is what Abram means. So that's why that's in parentheses there. The name Abram, the shorter version, means exalted father. But God renamed him, calling him Abraham, father of a multitude, reiterating his promise to make from him a great nation of people. Now in the text, Abraham asked God, oh, that Ishmael might stand before you. And when Abraham is saying the name Ishmael, what is he saying in Hebrew? In Hebrew, he's saying, God hears. Oh, that God hears might stand before you. And how does God respond? I hear you. But no, that's not my plan. It's not Ishmael. It's the promised son. And when God calls him the father of a multitude, how many children does he have? Well, he's got Ishmael, but that's not the one. Child of promise is the one. All right, now we're down to Genesis 17, 9 to 25. Who will read that for us? That's a little longer. Oh, Harold? Well, let Harold read this one.
God said further to Abraham, now as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between you and me and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. A servant who is born in the house or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not in your descendants. A servant who is born in your house or who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. But an uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people, and he has broken my covenant. Then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. and I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be the mother of nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, will a child be born to a man of 100 years old? Will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Then Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. But God said, no, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. And he shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear forth to you as this season next year. Then when he had finished talking to him, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all the servants who were born in his house, and all who were bought with money, every male among the men of Abraham's household, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the very same day, as God had said to him. Now Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin.
Thank you, Harold. God instructs Abraham that blank will be a sign of the covenant between the two of them. Circumcision. It was not that God instituted circumcision with the covenant that he would give the Israelites on Mount Sinai. This is when circumcision became a sign of a covenant between God and Abraham. Every blank in Abraham's house was to be circumcised, every male. And those born in his house were to be circumcised on the blank day, the 8th day. That also was incorporated into the law later on. Abraham's wife, Sarai, which means my princess. My princess. That's the meaning of the word Sarai. Had her name changed to Sarah, which simply means princess. Now, there's no commentary on why that distinction is made. You want to speculate? I'm just thinking, whose princess is Sarai? She's not Abraham's anymore. She is God's in that sense, but it's like she's the princess of a royal nation. I don't know if that's right or not, but I know that God found it significant enough of a difference to make the name change. Hearing again the promise of a son when Sarah was now blank years old, 90, she was 90 years old, and she hears the promise of a son, caused Abraham to blank, to laugh. At which point God told him that his son's name would be Isaac, meaning he laughs. At which point God told him, oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, that's right. I shouldn't look up from the page. When I look back, I get off. The record shows that Abraham is now blank years old, 99, and Ishmael is 13 years old. And I got that part about God hearing Abraham ask about Ishmael. I got that somehow out of place. That should be in this text, but I somehow put it in the wrong spot. Got it up in 17, 1 through 5. I'll have to make that correction later. But I'm glad we covered it. I think that's important. All right, Genesis 18, 9 through 15. Who'd like to read that? Anybody ready? Bob?
And they said, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "There in the tent." He said, "I will surely return to you at this time next year. Behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advancing in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, however, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh."
All right. The Lord with two angels appears to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and though Abraham apparently does not realize it's him, he just acts like it's three guys. They again promise a son to be born in 1 year. Upon hearing this from inside the tent, Sarah blanks. She laughs. The visitors ask, "Is anything too blank for the Lord?" Difficult. These fill-ins are pretty elementary, and they're right there in the text, but I wanted them to be there to focus our attention on these points that are being made. God put these things into the text, and he does that for a reason. Genesis 21:5, it's one verse. Who wants to read the last verse? Well, we timed this pretty good, didn't we? PJ, you got the last verse.
Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him.
So there it is. Abraham was blank when Isaac was born to him. He was 100. We do not learn, this is my observation, simply from what God blanks, but also from what he blanks. What's in the first blank? Says. That's what I would put in there. And this is just Marty's thinking. We don't just learn from what God says. We definitely do. What he says is his revelation, but what else do we learn from? We learn from what he does. So tell me, just from what we have read tonight, what are some things we have learned that God does? He keeps his promises. He keeps his promises. What about that, though? When does he keep his promises? On his timetable. When he says he does, on all the time, yes, all the time, but on his timetable. If you're trusting in God, wait.
Even though Ishmael wasn't the promised son, because he was of Abraham's descendant, he was also a great nation.
Yes,
That was the promise to Abraham.
right.
Your children, your child, the father of a great nation.
So it's not only that the Israelites are a great nation, but what's the other great nation created through the lineage of Abraham? Think about it. Yeah, Ishmael, yes, but there's even another. It's us. Remember what Paul says to the Galatian church? If you've been baptized into Christ, you are children of Abraham. And when you get to the Revelation, it says there are saints without number. Right after he talks about the 144,000, he says, yeah, but there's another crew that's without number. I think the 144,000 is representative, it's symbolic, but the actual number of saints is without number. He doesn't allow us to alter his plan. What else? What else do we see that God does? He lets us mess up. He gives us freedom to mess up. What does he do with faith? He counts it as righteousness. That is huge. Do not overlook the importance and the, what's the word, the profound importance of that. Don?
I think we should note that the promise was first given in Genesis 12, 1 through 7.
Okay.
But he just says, I'll make you a great nation. But he tells him to leave. Leave where his house is and go here. And in 15 it says, in chapter 15, 1 through 6, it says, and then he went and took him out and showed him the stars and went specifically, like this nation is going to be as many of these as these stars.
Right.
And then it just says he believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. But we have to note that the text is just now telling us he believed, but obviously he believed something because he left us when he said, get up and leave your house and I'll make you a great nation. It doesn't say believe God, but he got up and he left.
Right.
So we can assume that he already believed. I mean, I don't know how long it took him to gather all this stuff and pack up and start. But that probably took, a time frame, to get everything together and go. So, he started going and by the time 15 there, he's there. And then he shows him the stars and says, so he was obedient, but he also believed God, so that he acted on that. It seems like every time that he believed something about God, there was always a command involved. He told him to go. He told him to sacrifice his son. He believed God. Okay, well, I'm going to go do this. So he told him, what was the other one? There was one more that he told him to do that he acted on because he believed God. Sacrifice his son, leave, and one other. I forgot what it was. I can't think.
I'm not thinking of it myself.
Big ones.
When they walked in between the altars, cutting all the animals in half. Is that what you're talking about?
Quit writing that out. We're having fun.
Yeah, there's one other. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people talk about faith and just being this mental assent thing, but it seems like there's always something involved that faith is some sort of action involved. That
Right.
you believe God, so you're going to act on it. And
But when you get to Hebrews 11,
should be certain. When did he do it? Well, that very day.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty big deal we're going to circumcise all these
That's a
men.
big deal. Yeah.
Okay, we're getting ready to do that. Okay, well, that's a big deal, They're getting ready to do it. And they decided to do that very day, And so now relate that to Romans 4:11, where it says, when was Abraham declared righteous? Was it after he was circumcised or before he was circumcised? Well, he says, no, it was before he was circumcised. Yeah, but when he told him to be circumcised, he did it that very day.
Right.
But he was declared righteous when he believed God and began to act on it. That always brings that up. But when I started looking at things, and I'm looking at Romans, and I'm going, boy, this seems confusing, when I'm relating it to baptism, and so I went back to look at Genesis and going, well, every time Abraham believed God, it was a command that he decided in his heart, I'm going to do this. And that seemed to be where a person is declared righteous. And I relate that to baptism. I'm a person, in Romans 6:17, where it says, you obeyed from the heart that form of teaching. You believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And you say, well, yeah, I do. And you say, well, do you want to make him your Lord? Do you want to be forgiven of sins? Let's go be baptized. Well, okay. Well, he says in his heart, I want to be baptized. Well, that's going to be it's not 2 weeks later or 2 days later, let me do it in front of everybody. It's okay. You make that of a first importance. Now, obviously, if you're in a foxhole somewhere and you can't get out and do it right away, but you said, yeah, man, as soon as I can get there, I want to get there. I believe a person is declared righteous before they get to the water, but that's their first importance to get there. I don't think we should wait to do it in front of everybody on Sunday morning. We should, if you got an opportunity, but that's just my personal opinion. But when you make that as your first precedence, I want to go do this. I believe you're declared righteous on the way to water, and then when you hit the water, you'll receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. But I mean, if you die in a car wreck, in other words, or you die in that foxhole, I think you're still going to. I think God has declared you righteous if you decided to do that.
And there's only one who's the judge who can tell us one way or the other, and he's left us this record. Well, all right, I appreciate you all. Thank you for your kind participation tonight.